Hey, YouTube. Um, First off, by way of exposition, in 2003, I was a luggage thug for the United States government, part of the TSA, that annoying group that does stupid shit because of people who, blow shit up. Um, I, uh, I was working for them, uh, going through people's bags, and I got hurt. And I've pretty much been disabled since then. Not severe disability. I have a rather serious knee injury um, and chronic pain, which sometimes gets so bad that I have to take pain meds, which makes my brain go in interesting directions, or my mind, whatever you want to phrase that way. Um, and that's where this thought came from. Um, I was born 4 days after the first episode of Star Trek aired back in 1966. And I don't know where that popped into my head from, other than, I've just pretty much known that forever. Um, but that got me to thinking about the video I made a while back about the hows and whys of my atheism. Because really, that age range that I mentioned in that, 3 or 4 years old, that's pretty much my earliest memories. But I started thinking about the influences from before what I can remember. And I don't know for certain that my parents watched Star Trek. I mean, they've never really seemed to be the science fiction types to me, but you never know. And I do know that after I was about a year old, my mother went to work. I don't know if she'd been working before that. Never thought to ask. And she worked a different schedule than my father, so there was a time period where, you know, one would take me to I'm assuming my grandmother, who was watching me, taking care of me as a infant slash toddler, whatever. And the other one would pick me up because, it was that whole, like, one worked during the day, one worked second shift kind of thing. But again, my grandmother never really seemed a sci-fi type. And from what I recall, this would have been before she met the grandpa that I mentioned in that other video. But at any rate, the reason I'm bringing this up is because my mother likes to tell the story that when they were watching the moon landing in 1969 on television, that I walked into or toddled, or however you want to say it, because I was like 2.5, not quite 3 years old. I remember that, or I know that because of math. I walked into the living room or wherever the TV was and watched it for a little bit, turned around, and in my, broken 2.5-year-old English proclaimed that Star Trek was better. I don't know if this is a fact or if this is my mom, whatever, making up a cute story. And so, I mean, but that leads me to finding out, later, especially after watching Star Trek as a kid, well, early, 9, 10, that, and in the early teen age years, because it was, the late 70s, early 80s, and, everything was reruns, of course. But I was a really big fan of Star Trek, still am. Not so much the newer stuff after Next Gen, I mean, Deep Space Nine was kind of cool. Voyager was Gilligan's Island in space, which leads me to another thought that I had, which I'm going to get to later. And then Enterprise was interesting from the I don't know, technical is the right word, but the history of Star Trek, I guess you could call it that. But I mean, it wasn't something that I had to watch all the time. And Star Trek was one of those things that before the invention of cable, or not the invention of cable, but the widespread use of cable in suburbia, that was something to watch on television. Hey, Kool-Aid, yay. Red, my favorite flavor. But I found out during that time that Gene Roddenberry was an atheist. And, I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of cool. And this is where the pain meds tie into this bit. I started thinking about that because I woke up this morning hurting so bad that I had to take my pain meds. And I'm kind of out of it right now. You may or may not be able to tell. Looking back at classic Star Trek, I can only think of one instance where there's any kind of reference to, religion. And that's the episode, which I can't remember the title right now, where they come across the world where it's like the Roman Empire never fell, and the slaves are sun worshippers, and as Uhura points out somewhere in the episode, they're talking about the Son of God, not the sun, the burning ball of gas in the sky. But that's the only one that I can think of. And that led me to the part with the logic of the Vulcans and the extreme emotion of the Romulans, which were an offshoot of the Vulcans. I mean, they're the same race supposedly, but with no real difference other than the philosophies that they follow. And then I found an article earlier today while I was roaming around the internet that Gene Roddenberry had always held to the premise that in the future everyone will be atheists, or at least rational thinkers. And you can see that in the show, and the characterizations. And I seem to remember a novel. Well, I know I remember the novel. I think the title was Spock's World, where they talk about the rise of logic over irrationality and illogic and emotion, and how that created a schism in the culture, which led to the offshoot of the Romulans when they took off and went somewhere else. So I'm wondering if, as a toddler, watching Star Trek apparently somehow influenced my mindset even before the whole Batman thing. And I just think it's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't really have any way to know. I do know that, much later, as a nerd, being obsessed with all things nerdy, I liked the premise of the logic-based, rational society, which was one of the reasons that Dr. McCoy's always annoyed me, because he was, always ragging on Spock for the whole heartless, cold, rational. It's like, you know what? Shut up, old man. Yeah, you're a doctor. Who cares? And then that, again, the drug-induced weirdness, led me to other pop culture references to philosophy. Specifically, Gilligan's Island is the one that has been, excuse me, floating around in my head today. And I don't know where I read this or where I heard it, or if it's from a comedian, but Gilligan's Island is a representation of the 7 deadly sins. The logic being, okay, characters represent each of the 7 deadly sins. The skipper, gluttony and wrath, because he was, the fat guy, and he was always getting angry. Mr. Howell was obviously greed. Mrs. Howell, if you look at the show, never really did anything, so she would be sloth. So that's gluttony, wrath, greed, gluttony, wrath, greed, sloth. 4. Ginger is lust. The professor is pride, and Marianne is envy. So that covers all 7 of the deadly sins and leaves out Gilligan. And my thoughts on the thing, again, like I said, I may have read this somewhere, or from a comedian, I don't remember. But who was constantly keeping the castaways on the island? The guy in red. Gilligan. So Gilligan was representative of Satan, or the devil, Lucifer, whatever. Just random weird things that I think of when I'm highly medicated. So I think I'm done. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment, leave a response video, send me a PM, whatever. Yeah. Rock on. Talk to you later.